Hello and welcome to episode 7 of the review and recap series for the Living Under Nazi Rule OCR History B topic. We are carrying on with theme 4 today, which is Germany in war, and we are now looking at what was the impact of total war between 1943 and 1945. So we've looked at the war economy between 39 and 42, we've looked at increased opposition to the Nazi government during World War II in general. Now we're looking at the second half of Germany's experience in World War II between 43 and 45. So, the tide of the war has changed for Germany in 1943. They are increasingly facing defeat from the Soviets, who are advancing on Germany from the east. They've started to make up a lot of ground and are starting to heading towards Germany and Berlin. And the British and the Allies are now increasingly starting to push back from the west of Germany across Western Europe, and the Nazis realised that they're staring down the barrel a little bit. So in February 1943, Joseph Goebbels announces at the Sportpalast in Berlin that Germany must do anything and everything to win, and he calls this total war. He says that every single German citizen should be willing to give their absolute all, including their lives, to help Germany win this struggle almost for the Third Reich and for humanity in their eyes. So what was the policies that were involved with total war, and what was the impact of these policies? The first total war policy was that women were increasingly mobilised for the war effort. 3 million women aged between 17 and 45 were therefore called up. However, only 1 million of these 3 million do. Women are increasingly choosing to stay at home. They're increasingly seeing this as a futile and not worthwhile effort. So only a third of all women called up actually do go into the factories and go on to work. Okay, so that has a very inefficient and minimal impact on the total war effort. Anything not contributing to the war effort was ended. So, for example, professional sport was halted, magazines were closed, were stopped running, non-essential businesses were shut, theatres, gyms, opera houses were increasingly closed down as well, because they needed all of these businesses and these things and the workers to focus on this total war effort. So again, this reduces the quality of life for the German people at the time. Shortages also increasingly worsened. In the war economy video, we talked about how shortages and rations were problematic for the German people, but they get even worse under total war. In August 1943, clothes rationing was completely suspended as the production of new clothes was halted in favour of creating war products, and ration for food and coal as well increasingly got worse. There was an increase in propaganda as part of the total war policy. Goebbels realised that he could only get the total war policy to work if people truly believed in it. So they were encouraged to embrace total war and give everything they had to the German government. However, another significant part of the German war experience between 43 and 45 was the Allied air raids. So from July 1943, the bombing of Hamburg begins, and this kills 40,000 people. Hamburg was called the Hammering of Hamburg by the Allied forces, and it drastically reduced the morale of the people because they could see the widespread destruction of the civilians within Germany. In November 1943, Berlin, the capital of Germany, was increasingly raided. 500,000 people were made homeless by the bombing of Allied planes, and 100,000 people were injured. And this is the German capital, the centre of Germany, increasingly under threat and under siege by the Allied forces. In February 1945, one of the most catastrophic and destructive Allied bombing raids began, and it was in a place called Dresden, which was an industrial city with lots of factories that the Allies were trying to target. Because of the nature of Dresden's buildings and the way that the city was constructed, it caused what was known as a firestorm. So fire, literally like a tornado of fire, swept through the German city, and it caused 25,000 people to die. Now, interestingly, the Nazi government issued lots of propaganda against the Allied air raids, and they claimed that the Allies were committing war crimes because they were killing German civilians, unarmed German civilians, and they try and use this as a rallying point to try and encourage the German population to see that the Allies are in the Nazis' eyes, evil, and that we must do everything that we can to defend against them. So the Nazis used this as propaganda against the Allies. Of course, the Nazis were equally, the Luftwaffe were equally carrying out similar bombing campaigns across Europe, but it just shows you how the Nazis tried to spin this to improve morale, when in reality, the air raids had a very damaging impact on German morale because they could see the destruction happening around them and they just wanted it to end. There was also increased levels of terror during this particular time. Because of the huge numbers of refugees from the Soviet Union, it added lots of pressure to the Nazi governments in these areas. And we're going to talk about the impact that increasing Polish and Soviet refugees had on the German government and how this leads to the Holocaust. That will come in a following video. But another reason that terror increases is because of the shock of the July bomb plot in 1944. It led to lots and lots of arrests and executions, and the Gestapo and the SS are able to arrest around 7,000 people that they believe is connected to this plot, and they execute 5,000 of them. Now, we know, of course, that 5,000 people, the 5,000 that were executed, were probably not all related to this bomb plot, but they use it as a pretense to crack down on anybody that they consider to be dangerous to their rule. They are increasingly paranoid, and as a result, they crack down extremely harshly on potential enemies. In July 1944, Goebbels realizes that the war effort is going even worse. Total war has not managed to have the impact that he wanted, so he increases the amount of policies that he's implementing. 500,000 workers from German factories are conscripted into the army, and this leads to all kinds of problems because there is already a labour shortage, and now this has been exacerbated, made worse. Railway and postal services, therefore, are reduced and halted because there simply aren't enough workers to carry them out. Theatres, opera houses, music halls that we've mentioned before in the total war policy are increasingly closed down completely, again, making the lives of average German people worse. The age limit of compulsory service in the workplace for women was raised to the age of 50, up from 45, to try and plug that labour shortage gap. And they also increased the amount of forced labour that was used. By the summer of 1944, 7.6 million people from across Europe, particularly Eastern Europe, were brought to Germany to try and help the German war effort. And they were treated horrendously in these forced labour camps to try and produce things for the German military. Lastly then, in October 1944 to May 1944, the Germans are increasingly concerned about a Soviet invasion of Germany. They know it's imminent at this point, that they aren't going to be able to halt the Soviet invasion from the east. So they create a last line of defence, which is known as the Volkssturm, or in English that is known as the People's Storm, or the People's Army. And this was basically a militia group, so a civilian army, created in October 1944 for males aged 16 to 60. So those that were already not in the military, perhaps they were workers who had left behind, perhaps they were too old for military service, or they had some sort of medical defect that meant they couldn't be conscripted into the army. And the Volkssturm were it was a desperate last attempt. It was a desperate last line of defence. These men only had 4 days of very basic training. They had no uniforms. They had very old rifles that were captured from forces across Europe. And pictures show them marching through the street, and you can see the demoralising effect that this must have had on the German people, to literally see average men aged between 16 and 60 carrying very old weapons in old clothing. It would not fill the German people full of confidence that if the Soviets were to invade Germany, these men would be able to hold them off. But it shows the extent to which the Nazi government were willing to push their people right to the very end of the war. In April 1945, Berlin, the capital city, was the last place to fall. The Allies are invading from the west, the Soviets are invading from the east, and it's the last place left. Germans, like I said, were forced to fight until the very end. Again, there was a mixture of reasons for this. There was the fear of the SS, that if they didn't fight, they would be arrested and executed anyway, so they needed to fight to protect themselves from their own government. Lots of people remained loyal to Hitler. Lots of people, don't forget, had been indoctrinated and were fanatical about the Nazi ideology, so they wanted to fight and give up their lives for the Nazi government. And again, this is because propaganda had been effective. So the Germans fought literally until the bitter end, or lots of them did. And there is quite a telling quote from a historian called Ian Kershaw, who says that basically the Germans wanted an end to the horror, basically. They wanted the war to be over because of the hardships that they'd faced in their own country and because of the imminent defeat that was staring them down the barrel. Okay. So, as ever, I want you to test yourself on some of the key knowledge from this video. I'm going to flash the questions up on the screen here. What I would like you to do is pause the video here and see what you can remember. As ever, if you miss a question out or you're not sure of it, repeat it until you get it right. This is not all of the knowledge that you need to know, but it is a significant chunk of it. Okay? Thank you very much for watching, and I'll speak to you in the next video.